You built it. The business, the portfolio, the properties, maybe the family name. And somewhere between your last deal and your next dinner, a question showed up that you weren't ready for. When I'm gone, does any of this actually matter? That question doesn't come from weakness. It comes from wisdom. And the first man to ask it, seriously, publicly, on paper, was the wealthiest human being who ever walked this earth. His name was Solomon. And what he wrote next changed everything. Stephen K. Scott was a failure. 6 jobs, 6 years, 6 times he was let go, until a friend gave him one instruction: read 1 chapter of Proverbs every day. That's it. That was the advice. Scott followed it, and within a few years, he became a multi-millionaire, many times over. He restored his marriage. He rebuilt his reputation. He wrote the book, The Richest Man Who Ever Lived, published by Penguin Random House. A bestseller. But here's what most people miss about that book. Scott didn't just find a formula for building wealth. He found something far more dangerous. He found the moment Solomon stopped asking how to get rich and started asking what it all meant. That's Ecclesiastes. And if you haven't read it lately, you should. Because Solomon wrote it after he had everything. Here is the tension no one talks about. Solomon was given a choice by God himself. Ask for anything. Power, long life, the defeat of his enemies. Solomon asked for one thing only: wisdom. And because he asked for wisdom instead of wealth, God gave him both. He became the richest man who ever lived. Gold beyond measure, 1,000 horses, a navy, a kingdom at absolute peace. And then he sat down and wrote this: I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who comes after me. Ecclesiastes 2:18. Read that again. The richest man in history, sitting on top of everything, and his deepest fear was not death. It was irrelevance after death. Sound familiar? Principle 1. Wealth without wisdom is noise. Solomon writes in Proverbs 13:22, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Notice what he said. Not money, not assets. An inheritance. There's a difference. Money transfers. Inheritance transforms. The men who built empires and left nothing behind, not a philosophy, not a standard, not a name worth carrying. They transferred wealth. They did not leave an inheritance. Scott's book makes this point in a way that hits hard. The most important skill Solomon ever identified was not negotiation, not leadership, not finance. It was the ability to create a vision that outlives the man who created it. Principle 2. Your enemies are not outside. They're inside. Solomon writes in Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Scott dedicates an entire section of his book to what he calls the most destructive force in relationships. It's not betrayal. It's not incompetence. It's unchecked pride in a man who has already won. You've seen it. Maybe you felt it. The man who built something real and slowly stopped listening because he stopped needing to. Legacy killers don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, dressed as confidence. Solomon knew this. He lived it, and he warned us. Principle 3. The transfer is the test. This is where most wealthy men fail. Not in building, in passing it on. Ecclesiastes 2:19, Solomon continues, "Who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled. He built everything, and he knew his successor might destroy it." That is not pessimism. That is the most honest thing a wealthy man can say. Scott's framework, drawn entirely from Proverbs, points to one answer to this problem. You don't just transfer assets, you transfer character. And character is not inherited, it is installed deliberately over time by a man who decided his legacy was more important than his comfort. The question is not, who gets my money? The question is, who gets my wisdom? Solomon had everything, and in his final writings, he didn't celebrate the gold, he didn't celebrate the power. He wrote about meaning, about what endures, about the terror of building something that disappears the moment you do. If you're watching this channel, you're not here for motivation. You already have the resources. You're here because somewhere, quietly, that question showed up. When I'm gone, does any of this actually matter? It can, but only if you decide that the transfer is the mission. Not a footnote, not a will, not a trust fund. The mission. Solomon built the temple, not for himself, for every generation that would come after. What are you building?